What makes Avatar: The Last Airbender good? If you've clicked on this video, you're probably a fan of the show, so just think about that question for a moment. What makes Avatar good? Admittedly, it's kind of a trick question because there's lots of things that are good about Avatar. Its animation, its action, its setting and lore, and its handling of sensitive topics are all regularly touted as what makes Avatar so special. But I believe its most standout quality is its characters, and more specifically, the everyday interactions between those characters. And in those early interactions, Team Avatar really do not get along all that well at the start of the show. The three of them, Aang, Katara and Sokka, are constantly bickering, falling out, mocking each other, and just in general disagreeing. And it's great. It is one of the most important things the show does, because rather than the show telling us they're a great team, through conflict we see them struggle to become a great team. By pitting Aang, Katara and Sokka against each other so often, the writing can highlight the differences in both their personalities and their skill sets. It allows the show to demonstrate their individual flaws and where they need to compromise to learn to appreciate each other's abilities and overcome obstacles as a team. And by doing it this way so early in the story, we in the audience experience their relationships strengthen at the same time the characters do, allowing us to get more invested in their bond and in wanting to follow their story. And from my perspective, what's great about analysing how Avatar Book 1 does this in particular is that there are 3 examples of this exact same story being told with very varying degrees of success. So in this video, we're going to go through Book 1, focusing on Aang, Katara and Sokka and where the story uses conflict to deepen their relationships, and ultimately sell us on Team Avatar as an iconic party of heroes. And then we're going to compare that to see how the Netflix adaptation does those same things okay-ish, and how the Shyamalan movie does those things not even remotely okay-ish. And to reiterate, this is really just focusing on the main trio, so there's not going to be that much talk about the Fire Nation characters or the overall setting or story of Book 1, apart from where they specifically intersect with Team Avatar. So, to start things off, The Boy in the Iceberg, our first episode, and how are our first characters introduced to us? Through an argument. Almost as soon as the story starts, Katara and Sokka start squabbling on the ice. This is how the story characterizes their relationship.
Why is it that every time you play with magic water, I get soaked?
It's not magic, it's water bending.
Sokka sees Katara as a naive liability who's wasting her time on magic tricks, and she sees him as a close-minded oaf with an overinflated ego. Despite that, it becomes apparent that they do genuinely care for each other and want to keep each other safe from the threats of the Fire Nation. Sokka and Katara's relationship then is quickly established as one of them loving each other as siblings, but not respecting each other as individuals, which is what makes them so believable as siblings in the first place. And the arc of their relationship is going to be them increasingly recognizing each other's capabilities and respecting their decisions. When they free Aang, Sokka is distrustful and sees him as a nuisance, not caring about his airbending abilities or mysterious origins. Katara, on the other hand, is far more accepting and is enamoured with his airbending, seeing Aang as a potential way for her to improve her own bending. Both the siblings' reactions to Aang reinforce the negative impressions they have of each other. Sokka as a closed-minded grump, and Katara as overly trusting and obsessed with bending.
Great. You're an airbender, Katara's a waterbender. Together you can just waste time all day long.
As for Aang himself, we don't get much of a handle on what he thinks of Sokka at this early stage, but it's clear that he has an instant affection for Katara. However, we see a limit to that trust as he's not yet comfortable enough to share his true identity as the Avatar with her.
I guess I was wondering, you're being an airbender and all? If you had any idea what happened to the Avatar?
No. I didn't know him. I mean, I knew people that knew him, but I didn't. Sorry.
Okay, just curious. Good night.
Sleep tight.
Wanting to learn more about bending, Katara is willing to indulge Aang in his affection by going penguin sledding with him.
I'll help you catch a penguin if you teach me waterbending.
You got a deal.
But then Aang pushes that further, by convincing Katara to explore the old Fire Nation shipwreck with him, something that Katara is initially apprehensive to do.
Aang, stop! We're not allowed to go near it. The ship could be booby-trapped.
If you want to be a bender, you have to let go of fear.
So even in this first episode, we start to get a clear picture of the dynamics between the gang, especially Katara and Sokka, who are very well established straight off the bat. As well as some early developments of Katara and Aang's bond, even testing the limits of that bond this early on, with Aang withholding his identity and pushing Katara beyond her comfort zone to explore the shipwreck. Episode 2 is where we get our first real conflict. After setting off the ship's flare signal, Sokka suspects Aang of being a Fire Nation spy and, with Gran support, attempts to banish him from their village. Aang, obviously on the other side of this argument, is supported by Katara, who's willing to leave the village with Aang over her own tribe, despite Sokka's pleas.
Fine! Then I'm banished too! Come on, Aang, let's go!
Priming two things. Firstly, just how stubborn Katara is when she thinks, correctly or incorrectly, that she is in the right, and also just how desperate she is to learn waterbending.
Where do you think you're going?
To find a waterbender. Aang is taking me to the North Pole.
Which is Katara's biggest and most consistent motivation in Season 1. And that's worth keeping in mind. It's not about saving the world or the memories of her dead mother, which are big, vague emotional drives. Katara's main motivation is learning how to waterbend, which will give her more practical abilities and personal agency as a character. Anyway, Aang convinces Katara to stay with her family and leaves the village, but rushes back when he sees Zuko's ship approaching. Aang saves the village and hands himself over to Zuko. During the attack, Katara is concerned for Sokka's safety, reinforcing that despite their differences, when the danger is real, they really do care for each other. We then get an inversion of what we've already come to expect from the water siblings. Katara is determined to go and rescue Aang, and is already in the middle of trying to convince Sokka that they owe it to him for saving their village, before Sokka interrupts her by showing that he's already packed the canoe to go and get him.
If we don't help him, no one will. I know you don't like Aang, but we owe him.
Katara! Are you gonna talk all day, or are you coming with me?
Sokka!
It's funny, it's sweet, and it is a great way of establishing a kinder side of Sokka that we've not seen yet, and it does this by sidestepping a conflict we'd expect to see from these characters. They catch up to Zuko's ship and see Aang enter the Avatar state, confirming his lie to Katara, and we get our first bit of banter between Sokka and Aang.
Hey, Sokka. Thanks for coming.
Well, I couldn't let you have all the glory.
With them all eventually fleeing on Appa. Katara confronts Aang about his lie and he opens up a bit, saying that he never wanted to be the Avatar, now trusting the siblings more than he did initially.
Why didn't you tell us you were the Avatar?
Because I never wanted to be.
Katara reassures him and they begin planning to travel to the North Pole. So even from these first two episodes, it's clear just how heavily some of these interactions are setting up character traits and dynamics that will drive so much of the action throughout the series, and how Avatar uses confrontation, or subverts it, to highlight the unique personalities of the gang. The Southern Air Temple takes a slightly different turn. The episode doesn't contain an outright conflict in the form of an argument, as the trio are all generally on the same page about visiting the temple, but they all approach the situation differently. Aang's optimistic about reuniting with the monks, but Katara and Sokka are both concerned about what he'll really find there, and start to treat Aang more like a little kid, trying to keep his hopes up with Sokka playing airball with him. Their fears are confirmed when the siblings find a Fire Nation helmet. Sokka believes it's best to be upfront with Aang about it, but Katara hides it from Aang, wanting to protect him.
Katara, firebenders were here. You can't pretend they weren't.
I can for Aang's sake.
The episode's more focused on Aang's loss than anything else, which boils over when he finds Gyatso's body. The conflict isn't anyone's fault, but Aang triggering his Avatar state puts Katara and Sokka in danger, And it's through Katara empathizing with Aang over her own loss and pledging that she and Sokka are now his new family that resolves the danger.
Monk Gyatso and the other airbenders may be gone, but you still have a family. Sokka and I, we're your family now.
Strengthening their bond and showing to the audience that these characters are starting to open up and be a bit more emotionally vulnerable around each other. Episode 4 is the Warriors of Kyoshi, where Book 1's Village of the Week format begins to take shape, and where the show really starts to demonstrate the rough edges that need worn down between these characters. The episode is obviously most notable for Suki, and in addressing Sokka's sexist streak, but there's also a very clear conflict between Aang and Katara in this episode as well. It opens with Aang trying to impress Katara with his marble trick and riding the elephant koi, but both times she's too distracted to pay attention, being more focused on chores that need doing rather than Aang goofing off. As soon as Aang is revealed as the Avatar, the villagers of Kyoshi Island flock to him, giving him the gratification he was craving. Katara warns Aang not to let it go to his head, but it immediately does and they eventually fall out, highlighting their difference.
I thought you promised me this Avatar stuff wouldn't go to your head.
It didn't. You know what I think? You just don't want to come because you're jealous.
Jealous? Of what?
Jealous that we're having so much fun without you.
That's ridiculous.
It is a little ridiculous, but I understand.
Ugh.
Katara doesn't see any reason to hang around the island when they could be heading north and finding a waterbending master, whereas Aang wants to goof around and show off to the island girls. The culmination of this is Aang's presence alerting Zuko, who then attacks the village, and Aang reckoning with the fact that avoiding his responsibilities as the Avatar has real consequences.
Look what I brought to this place.
It's not your fault.
Yes, it is. These people got their town destroyed trying to protect me.
And by demonstrating this through a conflict with Katara, who until now has supported Aang, it showcases just how much this wasn't simply Zuko tracking them down, but Zuko tracking them down due to Aang not taking his role as Avatar seriously, highlighting flaws he needs to address. As for Sokka's story, it begins with Katara lashing out at him over sexist remarks, and then ribbing him over being beaten by the Kyoshi warriors that prompts him to go and seek Suki out, and eventually get humbled by her.
I'm sorry if I insulted you earlier. I was wrong.
We normally don't teach outsiders, let alone boys.
Please make an exception. I won't let you down.
It's a super memorable episode that is pretty foundational to Sokka's character, because it's not just about his sexist attitudes, and it's not even about meeting Suki. This episode really establishes a hell of a lot about Sokka's arc. Firstly, I laid out how his relationship arc with Katara is about them learning to respect one another. Well, he can't respect Katara as an individual if he doesn't respect women at all. So that's more broadly what this episode is the start of, Sokka taking the first steps to respecting his sister. But it is also showing just how much Sokka is capable of change. Fundamentally, he comes into this episode with a firm belief, gets exposed to new information that challenges those ideas, and then leaves those ideas behind. Girls can't be warriors because I've only seen guys do it. Hey, those girls beat me up. I guess girls can be warriors. It shows that Sokka is adaptable. He might be a skeptic, he might not believe things he can't see, but if you present him with new information, he can quickly take that on board and adapt to new scenarios. So while it might not be so apparent right now, those are some pretty good traits to foreshadow for a guy who might one day be tasked with quickly coming up with battle strategies on the fly.
We're gonna have to work pretty hard to cut through that.
What's this we stuff? Aang and I are gonna have to do all the work.
Look, I'm the plan guy. You two are the cut stuff up with waterbending guys. Together, we're Team Avatar.
The King of Amashu episode is pretty much all between Aang and Bumi. In fact, the episode purposefully incapacitates the siblings with the creeping crystal to keep them uninvolved. This is a good time to point out that not all episodes necessarily contain a conflict that develops Team Avatar's internal dynamics. Some episodes are more focused on other aspects of the story. However, that's not true for Imprisoned, which is a textbook example of using conflict to demonstrate how Team Avatar's skills complement each other. When the gang find Haru, you get the usual disagreement between Katara and Sokka. He wants to be cautious and move on as quickly as possible. Katara wants to learn more about Haru's earthbending and help the village.
He looks dangerous, so we better approach cautiously.
Hello there. I'm Katara. What's your name?
With Sokka eventually coming around and helping Katara get arrested and taken to the prison rig. Once she's with the Earthbenders, she gives this big, impassioned speech about how they can fight back against the Fire Nation, and it falls completely flat on its face. None of the Earthbenders are even listening to her. It's only once she's regrouped with Aang and Sokka that they can make a difference. Katara doesn't want to give up on the Earthbenders. They notice smoke coming from the rig, which leads Sokka to devise a plan using Aang's airbending to blow coal onto the prison's courtyard, giving the prisoners something to fight back with. This time, Katara's attempt to inspire the prison break works, and the gang escape with Haru and everyone else. The episode perfectly highlights how between Katara's drive, Sokka's smarts, and Aang's abilities, Team Avatar are greater than the sum of their parts. Episodes 7 and 8 are the Winter Solstice episodes, where the gang's relationship takes a back seat to focus on the world building, although part 1 does have some nice moments showing how far the siblings are starting to get closer to Aang. Right at the start of the episode, when Aang's upset at finding the forest burned down by the Fire Nation, Katara tries to comfort him by reminding him that once he's mastered all the elements, he'll be able to stop the Fire Nation from ever doing this again.
It's the Avatar's job to protect nature, but I don't know how to do my job.
That's why we're going to the North Pole. To find you a teacher.
Yeah, a waterbending teacher, but there's no one who could teach me how to be the Avatar.
But that doesn't make him feel any better. That's because Katara's approaching the problem from her mindset. What she wants is to become a more powerful bender. What Aang wants is for things to just go back to how they were before. Katara then recognises this, empathises with him, and search out for an acorn among the ashes, showing it to Aang as evidence that the forest can grow back to how it once was, which does get through and cheer him up.
These acorns are everywhere, Aang. That means the forest will grow back. Every one of these will be a tall oak tree someday, and all the birds and animals that lived here will come back.
Thanks, Katara.
That all happens in the first 5 minutes of the episode, and it's a great little microcosm for the rest of the story, because Aang ends up using that same acorn to placate the panda spirit by the end. We can also see how much Sokka's care for Aang has grown as well. When he sees Aang being attacked, he puts himself at risk to rush out and stop his friend from being attacked by the big, ugly, Evangelion reject. The waterbending scroll is our dedicated Katara, You're an Arsehole episode. Each of the team get these. Sokka's was the Kyoshi Warriors one, this is Katara's. After being warned about the comet by Roku, Aang's worried about not learning bending quickly enough. Sokka dismisses his concerns.
Well, let's see. You pretty much mastered airbending, and that only took you 112 years. I'm sure you can master 3 more elements by next summer.
But Katara offers to teach him. Aang easily picks up moves she took months to master, though he gets quickly distracted and ends up washing away their supplies, leading them into town where they meet the pirates and the waterbending scroll. Katara, seeing the scroll as a way to re-establish herself as a better waterbender than Aang, cannot let this chance go, and she steals it, putting them all at risk when the pirates attack, leading Sokka to criticise Katara's actions and pointing out that she's only really interested in benefiting herself even when she says it's for Aang.
I'm sorry, but you deserve that. You've been duped. She's only interested in teaching herself.
The show has repeatedly pointed out that mastering bending is Katara's main objective. Aang coming along and immediately surpassing her essentially undermines her entire identity. So when he picks up how to water whip from the scroll before she does, Katara snaps. She explodes at Aang just because he's good at something she offered to train him in.
See, the key to bending is...
Will you please shut your air hole? Believe it or not, your infinite wisdom gets a little old sometimes. Why don't we just throw the scroll away since you're so naturally gifted?
It's a nastier side of Katara that we've not really seen yet, but it's built from consistent aspects of her character and how she views herself, so it doesn't feel like it comes out of nowhere. Katara regrets her actions and quickly apologises, but it doesn't resolve the underlying sense of inadequacy she's feeling under the surface. Despite saying she wouldn't, Katara takes the scroll out to train by herself at night, attracting Zuko and the pirates, and putting her friends in danger again. Even Iroh agrees that Katara's screwed everything up, which is how you know it's bad.
This is all my fault.
No, Katara, it isn't.
Yeah, it kind of is.
Katara and Aang do work their issues out, and even Sokka gives the scroll back to her once she's learned her lesson, so no real harm done. But this episode does a great job at exploring how Katara's pride, stubbornness, and determination to master waterbending can, in the wrong context, create divisions among the team. Although, as we'll see later, those exact same traits can be used in a positive way. This is one of the things that Avatar is great at. It doesn't criticise its main cast for their personalities, saying that they are inherently good or bad traits, more that they're just very well designed, consistent personalities that can either benefit or be a hindrance to the characters based on the situation. And that's a theme which is explored further in episode 10, Jet. So, up until this point, Sokka has been taking L after L as a result of his skepticism. He was wrong about bending, he was wrong about the spirits, and he was wrong about women. So when he insists the gang travel by foot to avoid being spotted on Appa, Aang and Katara openly start making fun of him.
I'm tired of carrying this pack.
You know who you should ask to carry it for a while? Sokka's instincts!
That's a great idea.
They're equally dismissive of his concerns around Jet, taking Jet's side because he just seems so much more competent than Sokka is. Like Katara in the previous episode, this challenges how Sokka views himself, as the leader. However, this episode is sort of a reversal of Katara's. Where that episode refocused some of Katara's characteristics in a negative light, this one refocuses some of Sokka's positively. Like I said, Sokka had been proven wrong on so many things, it started to feel as though that's what his role in the show was. So that when Katara and Aang argue against Sokka and side with Jet, that feels like a natural conclusion as a result of Sokka's repeated failings. However, when Jet's plan for mass murder is exposed, Sokka is ultimately proven to be right this time. His cynicism has paid off and saved the whole town, reinforcing his value to the team as a contrast to Katara and Aang's more idealistic and sometimes naive outlook, with his different viewpoint balancing the gang out and covering some of their blind spots. As you can probably imagine, the Great Divide isn't really worth talking about. The only intergang conflict is when Katara and Sokka side with the separate tribes, but even then, it doesn't really reveal much about them personally.
They ambushed Jinwei and stole the sacred orb.
What are you talking about?
However, I do think looking at the episode through this lens helps explain a little bit of why it's generally considered the worst episode of the series. It's not the only episode where there isn't a conflict between Team Avatar, but in those other episodes, there is usually a focus on fleshing out the setting, or revealing something about the Avatar's destiny, or shifting the focus onto Zuko. That is not the case in The Great Divide. Team Avatar and this canyon of morons is all we have for the full episode. So the fact that the only conflict is between these two annoying tribes who are arguing for stupid reasons that don't matter anyway because they never appear in the show again, and it doesn't teach us anything about the main characters, means that it's really hard for the audience to care about what's happening on screen. Which isn't really something you could say about too many episodes of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Anyway, on that note of episodes that don't focus on Team Avatar's conflicts,
Let's keep flying!
The Storm is mostly about establishing parallels between Aang and Zuko's backstories, although the fact that Aang is willing to tell Katara about his backstory highlights how far their relationship has come, and the Blue Spirit is about establishing the idea of Aang and Zuko working together. It even does the same thing the Boomy episode did by incapacitating the water siblings to keep them out of the picture. The fortune teller brings us back to our regularly scheduled gangst and actually packs two conflicts into one episode. One between Katara and Aang over romance, and another between Katara and Sokka over fortune telling. Aang makes a replacement necklace for Katara after the one Zuko stole, with Sokka making fun of his crush, only for Katara to place him squarely in the friend zone.
Stop teasing him, Sokka. Aang's just a good friend. A sweet little guy. Just like Momo.
Once they get to Aunt Wu's, Aang eavesdrops on Katara's fortune, hearing that she'll one day marry a powerful bender, then spends the rest of the episode making increasingly obnoxious failed attempts to impress her.
Do you think that cloud looks like a flower?
Huh? Sure, I guess. Hey, Katara, don't you think that cloud looks like a flower?
Shh.
Only to succeed when he saves the village. leading to Katara potentially seeing Aang as the aforementioned powerful bender and considering him romantically for the first time, which is a pretty significant step in their relationship. On the other side, Sokka and Katara disagree over Aunt Wu's fortune-telling powers, which is just peak characterization for both of them. Sokka is skeptical of these so-called abilities that can't be proven, and Katara is idealistically swept along by Wu, telling her what she already wants to hear. Katara becomes obsessed with getting readings, Sokka becomes obsessed with debunking them. In the end, they compromise, recognizing that they've both taken things too far this time, but ultimately they can't alter who they are or where their personalities clash. Episode 15 is the long-awaited Aang, You're an Arsehole episode in Bato of the Water Tribe. During the trip down Water Tribe memory lane, Aang's feeling isolated and steps outside where a messenger passes him the rendezvous point for Bato to go and meet Katara and Sokka's dad. Fearing that the siblings will abandon him to go and see Hakoda, Aang hides the message from everyone, only coming clean under the guilt of Bato making him an honorary trusted member of the tribe. Sokka, feeling betrayed, understandably blows up in Aang's face, and he and Katara leave him, making Aang's fears a reality.
You can go to the North Pole on your own. I'm going to find Dad.
Now, Sokka, I think you should...
Katara, are you with me?
I'm with you, Sokka.
It's only when the Water Tribe trio hear the call of a wolf separated from its pack that Sokka reflects on how lonely he felt being left behind by the men of the tribe, and how Aang must be feeling that same loneliness right now. That's when he and Katara agree that Aang needs them more than their dad does, with the siblings reaffirming that Aang is now part of their family. Except we're not done here, because the deserter is another serving of Aang being an arsehole. Despite Sokka's warnings, Aang drags the gang to the fire festival so he can study firebending, where he exposes his identity, forcing them to run away with the help of Che, who leads them to the firebending master Zhong, who long ago abandoned the Fire Nation. Both Katara and Zhong warn Aang to be careful with his firebending, but his frustrations at Zhong's teachings and his eagerness to recreate tricks he saw from the fire festival means he loses control of his fire and accidentally injures Katara. For a second episode in a row, Sokka berates Aang, even attacking him this time.
Katara, I'm so...
I told you we shouldn't mess around with this! Look what you did! You burned my sister!
This highlights how Aang's goofy, carefree attitude, like Sokka's cynicism and Katara's stubbornness, in the wrong context, can be a detriment to Aang and those around him. Aang's horror at what he's done creates a fear of firebending in his mind, and he pledges never to firebend again, but Katara knows that he will have to once he's mastered water and earth. The episode also reveals Katara's healing abilities, giving her powers an upgrade. The Northern Air Temple is pretty light on conflict between the gang, it's mostly Aang confronting the loss of his culture. There's a clear difference of opinion between Aang and Sokka over the Mechanist's inventions, but it never boils over into anything. And then when they finally reach the North Pole, they're pretty set. Yes, there's a few small disagreements here and there, but during the last 3 episodes of Book 1, it's more a demonstration of how far our main trio have come and how well they work as a unit, rather than highlighting the differences between them. It's worth pointing out though, that the Waterbending Master is a reverse of the Waterbending Scroll for Katara's traits. In the earlier episode, it's her pride, stubbornness and determination to learn waterbending that causes problems and arguments for the gang. Here, it's those same traits that mean she refuses to submit to Pakku and challenges him.
Are you crazy, Katara? You're not gonna win this fight!
I know! I don't care!
You don't have to do this for me. I can find another teacher.
I'm not doing it for you. Someone needs to slap some sense into that guy.
Ultimately leading to her being trained as a master like she deserves. Like I said, the story never truly writes these characters off because of who they are. Those traits can either be positive or negative depending on the context. And hopefully, through pointing out where conflict between the main characters is used in the story, you can see how that conflict accentuates the contrasting traits of the heroes and helps define their distinct personalities. It's kind of the same reason that the whole enemies to lovers trope is such a recurring cliche, in that compared to friends to lovers, from a narrative perspective, starting off as enemies is objectively a more interesting setup. I'm not saying that makes it inherently better in every single case, and it's certainly not an endorsement of Zutara or anything dumb like that. But if you have two characters that are good friends platonically that get together romantically, you can predict what their relationship will be like. There's no great shift or realignment, it's just deepening a relationship that was already established. If two enemies get together romantically, there is a big realignment, and the story has to do more to show how that relationship works. If there are two characters who are personally or ideologically opposed to one another, their interactions should already be somewhat unpredictable. That creates tension. Throw on top of that the idea that they might fall in love, that creates a whole other level of complexity and intrigue that begs the audience to speculate about what that unpredictable coupling might look like, and it challenges the story to establish new bonds between these characters. On a smaller platonic scale, Avatar Book 1 is doing that same thing over and over again. It would be very easy for the story to say Aang, Katara and Sokka are all good friends and never show us why, but by making conflict a central part of their relationship and constantly splitting them up into opposing sides, the story is opening their relationship up to the audience and challenging itself to prove the strength of their friendship. Every time they argue, it creates a little bit of tension. Every time they make up, we understand their bond a little bit better. And over the course of Book 1, we have a real three-dimensional understanding of why the trio work together as well as they do, because we've literally seen their relationship pulled apart and put back together so many times. Without a story having conflict, without that division, you never really see the inner workings of a relationship anywhere near as clearly. And like I said, Avatar Book 1 is in a very unique position, because we have three takes on telling that same story. So we're able to compare and see why the Netflix and Shyamalan versions feel so different to the original. For the Netflix version, the best place to compare is Episode 3, Umashu. Now, Episode 3 is interesting because in the original series, the Village of the Week format allowed the show to have a looser episodic structure that could craft self-contained scenarios to best accentuate whatever the focus of the episode was. Netflix's way of addressing that with its more plot-focused serialized format was to basically just stack a bunch of these standalone episodes on top of each other and crush them with a pneumatic press. To set the stage for Episode 3, obviously Aang was unfrozen from the iceberg, left the South Pole with Sokka and Katara, and then they stopped on Kyoshi Island, where this version of Suki is a weird, creepy perv for some reason. Episode 3 opens with Katara... well, actually it opens with Azula and Ozai burning a bunch of people to death, but forget that because it's not relevant for the rest of this episode. Anyway, Katara's training her waterbending with Aang by the river, which you'll recognise as being from the Waterbending Scroll, a key episode which uses conflict to define some of Katara's strongest characteristics. Here, there's nothing like that. Katara's too traumatised by her mum's death to learn the water whip, and Aang is very supportive and understanding, and they agree to learn together when they get to the North Pole.
All the more reason for us to get to the Northern Water Tribe, right?
That's right.
We've got the best waterbending masters in the world. I might even listen to them.
That's all we really get from the Waterbending Scroll. No conflict, just two people who are friendly to each other and agree on the same conclusion, and then we're off to Umashu. Sokka and Katara reminisce on how awesome Suki was, and not that she was a weird, creepy perv for some reason, and Katara provides some light ribbing, which is nice, you get points for that. When they arrive at Umashu, it's actually Jet who helps them past security, and then Aang spots what he thinks is an airbender, who turns out to be Teo. So already that's like 4 episodes we're smushing together, which would be one thing if it was just to save time on the plot. But those episodes in the original show are more about providing depth to the characters than they are about moving the narrative along, so something's gotta give here. And give it does. For at least the first half of the episode, all the conversations between the main trio are entirely one way. Aang starts telling us what his thoughts are, and Katara and Sokka might nominally chip in to keep the scene moving along, but at no point are they seriously offering another perspective, and they certainly aren't disagreeing with him.
It's my responsibility to help these people.
How are you going to do that?
Being the Avatar isn't just about fighting. It's about helping people. like Teo and his father. And everyone in the city.
So the gist of this episode is that Fire Nation spies are bombing a Marshu. Aang and Teo want to go and investigate the bombing, which is entirely perfunctory. They want to investigate the bombings, they go to a location to investigate the bombs, they retrieve evidence of those bombs. There is no character exploration at all, especially not compared to the Northern Air Temple. I know I didn't talk about it a ton because it's mostly Aang's personal conflict, but that episode is rich in thematic depth and delving into Aang and him weighing up the desire to preserve his culture against the needs of the refugees who've hidden themselves in the temple. Whereas this is just a Scooby-Doo episode without the funny sandwich dog. But while Aang's story does get completely shafted this episode, I will give props where it's due. We at least get something with Katara and Sokka. The first scene tells us Katara's trauma is holding back her waterbending. She then spends much of the episode with Jet and the Freedom Fighters investigating the Fire Nation spies. During that, Katara and Jet have a genuine conversation about losing their mothers to the war, with Jet ultimately leading Katara to not remember Kaya by how she died, but what she was like when she was alive.
Remember that. Remember the sunrise.
Which allows Katara to move past her trauma and better control her waterbending. As for Sokka, he's tinkering around in the Mechanist's lab and then nerding out over how to perfect the airship design, when the Mechanist acknowledges Sokka's engineering talent and encourages him to pursue it. To which Sokka says he needs to be a warrior like his dad, and how Hakoda essentially thinks Sokka's ideas are a waste of time, and until now, nobody's ever recognised their merit.
Protecting the ones we love is important. But I also know we must pursue the talents that we've been given. Sokka, you're a gifted engineer. Don't ignore that. It's not always easy to find your path in life, but when you find it, you must embrace it.
And firstly, fuck this show's interpretation of Hakoda, but secondly, this isn't nothing. Sokka's receiving some fatherly advice that he's been lacking, and it's opening him up to new ideas about where his future might lie. For both siblings, there are some genuine character-driven moments that are endearing Katara towards Jet and Sokka towards the Mechanist. So when the siblings meet up, and both have evidence that the other side is behind the bombings, after nearly 40 minutes of this episode, we do get some genuine conflict. And it's alright. I actually do think the fact that Katara and Sokka are taking opposite sides after spending so much time apart and being swayed by opposing factions makes this scene a reference to the Great Divide, so that's another episode we're just stirring into the mix. But that aside, the argument has Katara and Sokka's personality fairly on point, except it doesn't fully land because it isn't fully earned. During the conversation, Sokka says this:
"This is just like you, Katara, willing to believe anything as long as it helps you."
What does he mean by that? Because it's true, that is absolutely a fair accusation of Katara. In the cartoon, during book 1, where the waterbending scroll episode actually happened, and wasn't just a single scene where Aang was nice to her. What does he mean that she's willing to believe anything so long as it helps her in this story? Because yes, Jet helped her with her trauma during their chat, but there's no reason to believe Sokka knows anything about that, seeing as they immediately started this argument the moment they were both in the same room. So where is Sokka's line aimed at? Because he's essentially accusing live-action Katara of something the animated Katara did. And that's kind of a problem that this show has. Even when the writing demonstrates that it logically understands where these characters' personalities are supposed to be, it hasn't done the legwork to actually showcase it. And there's a whole load of reasons for that, which I've talked about previously reviewing the Netflix series, about how the 8-episode format just does not work for this story. But for the focus of this video, just think of how much characterization has been lost as a result of this episode. The waterbending scroll and all that does for outlining Katara's character, gone. Jet and how it clearly defines Sokka's value within Team Avatar, gone. Even if he is still technically right about Jet, it's not like he proved anything. He was arguing against Jet because he was emotionally attached to the Mechanist. It was Aang and Teo who found evidence of Jet planting the bombs anyway, so there's no way that Sokka takes this win. And then the Northern Air Temple and all the focus that puts on Aang processing the loss of his culture, reduced to fiction's most time-efficient detective plot. And what it's replaced with are some genuine moments of nice characterization, but it doesn't make up for everything that's lost. And it's also coming at these characters from a completely different angle. Because the Netflix version is more plot focused, it needs to be more economical in getting us attached to these characters, and so it does that through their backstories. And man, I remember being a teenager and thinking that a character having a tragic backstory was directly proportional to them being well written, but the older I get, the more I realise that a character having an interesting past is just way less important than them being interesting in the present. So what the Netflix show is trying to do with backstories is give everyone some baggage from their past, so the audience can relate to that, pinpoint the characters' hang-ups, and quickly move on with the story. It's a very economical way of engineering audience investment. Just make them sad. You'll notice in the original Book 1, Katara's dead mother really does not come up that often. Katara's most consistent motivation is learning to waterbend, something that makes her a more proactive person, and she's largely driven by her stubborn tenacity, and we see countless examples of her personality clashing with Aang and Sokka, and, over the course of the season, through experience, they learn to respect her, she learns to respect them, and they start to work together, with their skills and personalities beginning to complement more than they clash. Our investment in Katara comes from being entertained by her strong defined personality and seeing her grow closer to Team Avatar over time. And when avenging Kaya becomes a relevant plot point down the line, we're invested in that because we were invested in Katara first. Or you could avoid doing all that nuanced characterization and just make her a sad girl with a dead mum. Why is there so much more focus on the air nomad genocide and Monk Gyatso in the Netflix version? Because we don't have the episode count to characterize Aang properly, so make him a sad monk with a dead culture. Oh, but then you can't really do the same with Sokka. Unless we make this version of Hakoda a neglectful prick, and then Sokka can be a sad boy with daddy issues. And once that's achieved and all the heroes' characterization is just that they have a sad backstory, we can have completely frictionless dialogue where all the characters just have the same opinion 95% of the time. So, rather than being invested in the characters because we're entertained by them and we want to see more of their interesting personality dynamics, here, we're supposed to be invested in them because we feel sorry for them. And that is such a wildly different interaction between the characters and the audience. And the focus on dramatic backstory also seems to trick people into thinking that the show is somehow more mature and grown up. Darker, yeah, I'd say Netflix Avatar has a darker tone, but I don't know about more mature. It seems less complex if anything, all the characters' rough edges have been smoothed over. It's like when people were saying, does removing Sokka's sexism matter if he gets over it by episode 3? Well, it's not just about him being sexist, him getting over being sexist is itself valuable to the show. The relationship arc between him and Katara is them learning to respect each other. The start of that is him learning to respect women in general. That's him and his sister a step closer because of him leaving his sexist attitude behind. Not to mention what it demonstrates about Sokka being adaptable to new information. We need to see this as an audience in order to appreciate it. So yes, removing Sokka's sexism does matter, because there's a difference between seeing that rough edge getting smoothed over and that rough edge just never existing in the first place. Like, I'm sure everyone remembers that trend from a few years ago where people were turning sheets of tinfoil into these mirror-polished balls using a hammer and sandpaper. The actual finished object often wasn't that impressive. Some of them weren't entirely round, some weren't that shiny, some had cracks and divots, but it was in reaching that end result from where it started and the effort that went into that transformation that was what made them interesting and worth the appreciation in the first place. If I show you the shiny ball and tell you how I spent days hammering it into shape and polishing it from a roll of domestic tinfoil, that is a more interesting accomplishment than telling you I got it off Amazon. It was like 12 quid. That's these two versions of Team Avatar. The original is the handcrafted tinfoil ball that you can appreciate the hard work that went into it, and the Netflix version looks the same, but just got shipped in on next day delivery. But, to its credit, at least the Netflix version does have something going on. It's nowhere near as good as the original, but at least there's some humanity to hold on to. Do you want to see a version of this story that has absolutely nothing going for it? Now you've got to give me props here, because if you've made it this far into the video, you need to know I had to re-watch Shyamalan's Airbender to make this video, okay? That's got to be worth a like at least. So we start off, as always, with Katara and Sokka out on the ice. Sokka thinks Katara's waterbending is weird and pointless. Katara doesn't think Sokka's a worthwhile hunter. That almost seems like accurate characterization, doesn't it? I mean, rather than being shown, for some reason Katara's opinion is delivered in expository voiceover that begins, no joke, 55 seconds into the movie.
My brother and I live in the Southern Water Tribe. In this time of war, food is scarce. My brother and I often go hunting for food, but unfortunately my brother isn't the best hunter in the world.
But regardless, that is a pretty good starting point for the siblings' attitudes towards each other. Or it would be, if it was ever relevant again at any point during the movie. Katara frees Aang, and he doesn't wake up. So the first impression we get of our goofy, impish main lead is him lying down motionless, and frankly, looking terminally ill. Sokka has no hesitation or even any opinion about bringing Aang into their village. And the actual introduction of Aang is this awkward, claustrophobic non-conversation where he's trying to get dressed and Katara's just staring at him with this creepy dead half smile. And the camera's way too close and just flat against her face because they decided to shoot this scene in the most suffocatingly cramped room, which is so weird because this igloo is obviously a set, so why not just make this space larger when you were designing it? The vibes of this movie are impressively atrocious, and it does nothing to endear us towards the characters. We say goodbye to even more characterization when Gran tells Katara and Sokka about the Avatar and the spirit world. Sokka has no opinion at all on all this spiritual mumbo-jumbo, and Gran's the one telling them they should leave the tribe with Aang, rather than Katara proactively deciding that for herself and being willing to fight for her decision.
The Fire Nation doesn't wish to live by the spirits. That's why they are so frightened by the existence of the Avatar.
What could he do?
With his mastery of the 4 elements, he will begin to change hearts. And it is in the heart that all wars are won. Now, go help this boy.
Anyway, they get to the Southern Air Temple, and Aang finds the remains of the Air Nomads within about 10 seconds and triggers his Avatar state. But instead of focusing on Katara and Sokka pledging to protect Aang and look after him like family, the focus is on this cryptic Avatar vision with the smoky spirit dragon thing. We can hear Katara trying to reach Aang, but it's off screen and it's never shown. The focus never shifts from the dragon thing, and there's no confirmation that Aang even registers Katara calling for him. There's certainly not a hug, there's not even a look towards her for reassurance. There's no soul, there's no warmth, there's nothing. So then, leaving the Air Temple, this is where the Village of the Week stretch should begin, and where we get most of our characterization for the main trio. And yeah, things do not improve. I don't need to explain the Earthbender prison. It's dumb, everyone knows it's dumb, it's the most famous scene in this film because of how dumb it is. But just to compare it to Imprisoned and how brilliantly that episode demonstrates how Team Avatar is greater than the sum of its parts, and what they can't achieve alone, they can achieve together. What if you did that, but you set it in the stupidest location possible, and then, instead of demonstrating through failure why Team Avatar have to leverage every member's unique skill set effectively to overcome this disadvantageous position, you make Aang give Katara's inspiring speech, and it just works first time because all the Earthbenders needed was someone to remind them that they can levitate rocks.
There's Earth right beneath your feet.
And then, for some reason, we film it all in this single continuous Steadicam shot, even though there's not enough happening for most of the scene to justify that, so we get this aimless, wandering camera work where we spend an awkward amount of time just looking at the back of actors' heads. Like, I know I'm here to criticize the characterization, not the camera work, but Fucking hell, this is ugly. So we lose all that work in building up the team dynamics from Imprisoned, and about a dozen other episodes that don't even get a reference here. And then all three heroes unanimously decide, without any friction, to go village to village saving people. Sokka has no opinion on this matter, and why the hell is the camera so claustrophobic? Why is the scene of the heroes optimistically planning to save the world shot like it's a psychological thriller? I hate this film so much. Okay, so the only bit of conflict we get between the gang is when Aang wants to visit the Northern Air Temple because he thinks he can access the spirit world there where he can talk to the spirit dragon thing again. And Sokka says,
I don't think that's a good idea. We started a rebellion.
Try to talk him out of it.
What does he mean by that? No, not like genuinely this time. I don't know how that relates to this situation. But regardless, it is a completely nothing conflict anyway. There's no reason Aang can't go to the temple. There's no reason Katara and Sokka couldn't go with him. But Sokka disagrees with the idea because the story needs Aang to sneak off by himself so that he can be separated from the siblings and get captured. That's basically it. It's a manufactured conflict to advance the plot. Nothing here informs us about the characters. And really, that's it. Aang gets taken by Zhao, Blue Spirit, suddenly we're at the North Pole. The film genuinely offers no reason to care about these characters. So yeah, as valid as the criticism of Netflix's interpretation of Team Avatar is, Jesus Christ, it could be so much worse. And in the most appreciated metallic sphere competition, if the original Team Avatar is that handmade tinfoil ball, and the Netflix one is the metal ball just ordered off Amazon, the Shyamalan version is a 3-week-old rancid puddle of dog vomit and blood that isn't even fucking framed correctly in the shot. And it makes me so much more thankful for just how well the original story got things right. Not just with its characters, but its setting and story too. And while obviously this video isn't about analysing the lore or the plot, I do want to quickly touch on how those things facilitate focusing on fleshing out the characters in Book 1. If you're trying to entice a new audience to follow your story, and not only do you have to quickly grab their attention with the characters and the plot, but you also have to explain the world, its history and the magic systems too, how much time you spend explaining the world building when non-fantasy stories can jump straight into the narrative is the barrier to entry. It's essentially how likely someone's going to get filtered by seeing a hand-drawn map or a name that's a bunch of vowels and apostrophes. The lower the barrier to entry, the easier an audience can get on board with your story. And as far as fantasy stories go, Avatar The Last Airbender has an exceptionally low barrier to entry. I'm sure a lot of it is down to it originally airing on a kids' network, but nevertheless, it's genuinely impressive how intuitively so much of the world building is designed, so that the story can cut down on its exposition and the audience can absorb that lore almost subconsciously. Like, as far as the magic system goes, all you need to know is, do kung fu, get magic elements. Aang can't use magic to take someone else's appearance or turn rocks into a 3-course dinner or summon demonic minions. All he can do is control the 4 elements. And he's the most complex magic user because he can control more than one type of element. And those elements are air, water, earth and fire. The same basic elements that have been part of the Western subconscious going all the way back to Aristotle, that most viewers are so familiar with they'd likely never even question why those elements specifically were chosen. So we never need to think about how the spells work, so long as we see martial arts followed by some elemental control, we're satisfied that we understand the magic system. The world is separated neatly into 4 countries, each representing a specific element, and they even colour-coded the map so that it's instantly readable. Even if you've never seen this show before, you could point out that the Fire Nation is the red one with all the volcanoes. It's that intuitive. The background to the story is that one of the countries has gone evil and is trying to conquer the others. Which one? Yep, you guessed it, it's the Fire Nation. Most people probably didn't even question the choice to make the Fire People the bad guys on their first watch through. It's just what you would expect. And what do the heroes need to do this season? They need to go from the South Pole to the North Pole, a straightforward, easily digestible linear goal from one extreme to the other. Even if we don't know anything about this world, we understand where the North and South Poles are and what a journey between them might entail. If the journey was between, say, Gowling and Ember Island, we might have more questions around what these places are like, where are they in relation to each other, and is that considered a long journey? But South Pole to North Pole, we already understand everything we need to know to follow that journey. And because it's a travelogue story, as long as we either see the main characters literally journeying, or open an episode catching up with them in a new location, it subconsciously scratches that little itch at the back of your brain that needs to know that the characters are making progress. There's nothing worse than feeling like a story is just spinning its wheels but not going anywhere. But by having this simple south to north journey, the show can satisfy that urge by simply featuring a new location to let you know that there's nothing to worry about. Progress is being made. And if you really pay attention, you might even notice that the story interrupts that rhythm when it does want you to worry and grab your attention. In the Winter Solstice episodes, they veer off course and visit Roku's island, delaying their journey, and in the Storm and Blue Spirit episodes, they're stuck not making any progress at all. First by the storm itself, then by Aang's capture and the siblings getting sick. Why would the story interrupt its progress like that? Well, it's because that's how it signposts that these episodes are different, and you need to pay attention to the important world building or character motivations that are going to have major impact on the rest of the story. But it's all done in this very subtle way that feels completely effortless on the story's part. You can absorb so much through the context of how the show presents information, rather than it stopping to explain itself all the time. I mean, even down to the colour coding of each nation and how people dress, so that we never have to stop and think what nation a character's from or what side they're on, we can just read that from their colours, which lets the show do some amazing things like this scene, where, without dialogue, we see news of Aang's arrival on Kyoshi Island travel by word of mouth to Zuko, just by the colour of the scene going from blue to green to red. And all of this is done, like I said, to lower the barrier of entry, to make it easier to understand the world through context, so the show can spend less time explaining its world and more time focusing on making sure we understand these characters, their dynamics, and why we should care about them. And that's ultimately what all of this is in service to, giving the show enough time to get us to know these characters, who they are, what they want, what their struggles and flaws are, how those get in the way of them bonding with the other characters, how hard they work to overcome those differences, and how their newfound relationships help them achieve their goals. Once we've seen that arc and we understand Team Avatar, we are invested. We're following these characters no matter what happens next. And that allows the show to be more ambitious and open up the setting and story to deeper themes, more intricate storytelling, more detailed character analysis, and larger threats in Book 2. Now that we're invested in Team Avatar, the story can do things like the Ba Sing Se arc, which completely abandons the Village of the Week formula for a serialized format that introduces much more political complexity into the narrative that might have been too much too fast to explore in Book 1. Being comfortable with Team Avatar also allows the story to shift more focus onto Zuko, with his redemption arc really coming into the spotlight in Book 2. And you could absolutely do a whole separate video like this about how Book 1 sets up Zuko's redemption and gets the audience to sympathise him before it really begins in Book 2. In fact, I'm sure it would get way more views than this one because everyone loves a good Zuko analysis, but whatever, here we are. And the show doesn't rest on its laurels with Team Avatar either. Just as the original trio feel like they've settled into their place, the show throws Toph into the mix, a character who feels like she's been custom crafted to clash with every member of the team and keep conflict occurring. And it's almost certain that Toph was designed with that intent. Most fans know that Toph's concept design was this older, buff male character who was originally intended to play a role in a love triangle between him, Aang, and Katara. Now obviously they didn't go down that route, but even from those early ideas, you can see how Toph was always meant to shake things up amongst the heroes and create conflict.
Look here, Sugar Queen. I gave up everything I had so that I could teach Aang earthbending, so don't you talk to me about being selfish.
Sugar Queen?
If you're not tough enough to stop the rock, then you could at least give it the pleasure of smushing you instead of jumping out of the way like a jelly-boned wimp. 3 on 3.
Actually, Toph, there's 4 of us.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't count you. You know, no bending and all.
I can still fight!
Similarly, in Book 3, just as Toph settled in with the gang, that's when their former enemy Zuko switches sides, which inevitably brings more conflict into the team. And while she's more relevant to Zuko's side of the story, Book 2's introduction of Azula as a new major antagonist piles the pressure on the gang, by her constantly being 2 steps ahead of them, causing them to routinely be on edge and snap at each other. And just like in Book 1, it's in seeing the characters learn to overcome these obstacles and cooperate that the story deepens our appreciation for them, constantly using conflict to showcase and then overcome the barriers that separate the heroes from each other and ultimately their goals. Because once we understand the internal achievements of the heroes' party, we care about their external achievements all the more. It's what changes our relationship with the story from the world was saved because the story needed it to be saved to the world was saved because the heroes made that happen. We feel as though we're watching real people making real decisions based not on what the narrative needs, but grounded in their strong, consistent personalities. And it's through that internal conflict that we understand who those heroes are and appreciate the internal achievements which make the external wins all the more impactful. That's something that Avatar never loses focus on, and I think it's a major part of the reason the show has endured so well in the 20 years since Book 1 aired. Thanks for watching.